Welcome back to the History of Everything, I guess. This is going to be a completely different video from what I usually make. If you're new to this channel, what I usually do is I make videos on different historical topics that I find interesting. Sometimes they're a shorter format, which is what I would usually post either on YouTube Shorts, TikTok, or Instagram, or a longer format like the ones that I did on the fall of Constantinople or Balkan pseudo-history, which are a longer format since YouTube allows for that. This is going to be a little bit more serious. It's going to be a lot more political, if you can even say that, and it's going to be significantly more serious than everything I have posted so far. For those few of you that are actually following what I do, first of all, thank you from the bottom of my heart. It means a lot to have your work acknowledged, even if it is by a handful of people. You guys are awesome. But to those of you who don't know, on Monday I posted this short right here, or this TikTok, depending on what platform you're watching it on. Either way, I'm going to have a link down in the description where I talked about the political spectrum, political labels, where they came from, why I think they're completely irrelevant to the modern world. So in order to do all of my opinions a little bit more justice, I decided to do this longer format. Like I mentioned in the previous video, terms like right-wing and left-wing are a result of the French Revolution. For those of you who don't know what the French Revolution was all about, it was the result of the House of Bourbon holding basically all of the power in France and basically sharing it with the aristocracy and the Catholic Church. This obviously led to a lot of animosity from the lower classes towards the clergy, towards the elite, towards the crown, as it was obvious. It was meant to happen, basically. This led to the storming of the Bastille, as we all know, and eventually led to the First National Assembly in 1789. Obviously, during the time of the French Revolution, not everyone was out for blood. There were a lot of people that just wanted some moderate change. There were people that wanted some more radical change. This is where we got different factions, like the radical Republicans, where we got the Jacobins, where we got more social conservatives that just wanted the king to dial back some of his power. This is where we got people that wanted the clergy to have some of the power. But basically, they fell into one of two categories: the moderates and the conservatives on one hand, and the radicals on the other. Obviously, this was France's first ever attempt at democracy, especially since France's politics at the time were basically the Estates General, which basically gave each of the classes one vote, meaning that the monarch and the aristocracy had one vote, the church had one vote, and all of the rest of the population also had one vote. This meant that whatever kind of motion was put into place before that, it would get overruled by the simple majority of the minority that was the Catholic Church and the elite of France at the time. So in order for the National Assembly to tally the votes, they decided to do things a little bit differently. The president of the assembly would place all people that were more radical in terms of how they wanted the revolution to move on. He would put them on his left-hand side, and people that were more moderate or more conservative, they would be put on his right-hand side. This is where we get terms like right-wing and left-wing. And this is why they obviously mean conservative and liberal or progressive, respectively. As time went on, moving further away from the time of the French Revolution, eventually entering the 19th century. More and more ideologies started popping up, and they wanted to be placed somewhere within this new continuum of political thought, with the left-wing paradigms, including socialism, communism, and more right-wing ideologies included ideas like laissez-faire economics, like conservatism, and in some more extreme cases, nationalism. A little side note about nationalism in its purest form: it's not a right-wing ideology, the same way it's not a left-wing ideology either. In fact, the best way I can describe it is it's more of a lens through which one might see the world. They might see international politics, and they might see the world stage in general. It's basically this idea that I am a part of this greater total, this nation, and whether or not I want the needs and the interests of my specific nation to be prioritized over those of others. In fact, I would say that it's a more complete understanding of patriotism. This is why, contrary to popular belief, it's not contradictory for someone to be a nationalist and to be left of center, or at least in the traditional sense of the word. In fact, it has been done on numerous occasions, starting with Irish republicanism, the Scottish independence movement. A lot of Welsh nationalists are also left-wing in the traditional sense and also so nationalistic. And the same thing has happened here in my very native Greece. It might seem like I went off on a tangent here, but I promise everything will come full circle once again. Obviously, as time went on, more and more political ideologies started entering the public dialogue, like fascism, Nazism, and communism. This obviously meant that these ideas and these ideologies needed to be mapped somehow. This is where we get the Nolan chart, which was created by political activist and libertarian politician David Nolan, where he tried to map where people would fall on this chart in terms of whether or not they were more socially conservative or more socially liberal, whether or not they wanted more or less government intervention when it came to the economy, which it might seem like it's a complete enough chart, but I don't think it is, because it doesn't account to whether or not someone wants a more strict gun policy, for example, whether or not they're more in favor of a more aggressive foreign policy, and whether or not they want to be more nationalistic or internationalist in the way their country deals in the world stage. Then we entered the current century, the 21st, where this is the most common way to map someone's political identity, which is the political compass. It's a free-to-use website where they basically ask you a bunch of questions, and you say whether or not you agree or disagree, depending on how strongly you feel about said questions, and basically maps your ideology. There is one serious problem with this as well. It has been created with a very, very strong left-wing bias. I'm not saying this to throw any shade towards the creators. Obviously, us being humans, we all have our biases. But come on, like a lot of those questions, it's like they want to make you feel them. It's almost like they want you to answer the questions a certain way. Otherwise, it's gonna call you a fascist, basically. This brings us to the present day when, in my opinion, all of these labels and ideologies have pretty much become obsolete. I want to be clear, I'm still gonna be using the terms right-wing and left-wing in everyday conversation, but I don't think that they should be the end-all be-all of political discourse. In fact, I would say that these are labels that have been used far more to divide the populace rather than anything else. My country is a very good example. In fact, between the years 1946 and 1949, meaning right after the end of World War II and our triple occupation, we basically got plunged into a civil war because of different factions. In fact, I would go so far as to say that millennials and Gen Z are the only two generations that have their parents had tried to raise them in a post-national society, meaning that the idea of the nation state was basically being pushed aside for a more international, more holistic approach towards seeing the world. But we were also the first generation to get handed such a bad hand. To better drive my point home, I have to say this. My generation has completely different problems and threats to our well being than the previous generations did. Obviously, we don't live with the constant threat of being under Nazi or Soviet occupation, which we're obviously incredibly grateful for, but at the same time, we do have to worry about complete societal collapse due to incredibly bad management from the previous generations to a complete destruction of the social fabric, again, through no fault of our own, and the rise of AI, which is one of, if not the greatest disruptive technology in the history of mankind. Two other very important problems that my generation faces more than the previous ones did when they were our age are the rise in the cost of living and also, very importantly, the untimely death of national politics. In fact, I would go so far as to say that at least here in the West, national politics have pretty much died out because our politicians have sold out to the highest bidder. And we all know who that is. By the way, the irony isn't lost on me. I'm fully aware that I have also used AI, especially while making the covers of my videos. But I'm willing to say that this is probably not even the tip of the iceberg. There are significantly greater problems that will arise with the use of AI. And in fact, I'm starting to see a lot of them now because AI is this incredibly strong tool. A lot of people forget to use their brains and just blindly parrot everything that whichever AI chatbot they use tells them, which is incredibly sad if you think about it. Given everything I've said and given the current state of discourse in our countries, can you honestly say that parties that identify themselves still using terms that are as antiquated as left wing and the right wing, that they can do what is necessary for the population? I would argue that no, they cannot. They're so stuck in the past that they're unwilling to look at today's problems and try to find real modern solutions for modern problems. So yeah, these have been my 2 cents on this topic, and obviously I would love to know what you guys think. If you like my content, please don't forget to like, share, subscribe, comment, all of that social media crap. Don't forget to follow me on all my socials, which I always list down below. And if you really like my work, please consider becoming a patron of mine here on Patreon. Until next time.